This panel is called Tech Policy, the GC's Perspective. As I mentioned at the top of the conference, there are three general areas that legal hackers discuss during their events. One of those is legal technology, second one is civic technology, and the third one is tech policy. Obviously, as general counsels, and I'll introduce them in just a second, as general counsels, they deal in many respects with certainly the first and the third, but also in some respects with the second, to the extent that they're interacting with government. So what we wanted to do is to take some time today to address some of those issues, ask some questions about how technology companies, and in particular their legal departments, engage on issues of technology policy. That's where new technologies, new business models, new service delivery mechanisms interact with the existing legal system that was maybe designed 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or more. And raising challenges not only between the government and business, but also incumbent businesses that may have the ear of regulators and new startups and new business models. So anyway, with that, we'll introduce the panel. I'll give your names and your companies, and then what we'll do is we'll start with the first question. And the first question is going to be, what does your company do? What is your role within the company as general counsel? And then finally, what are some recent tech policy issues that you've addressed? So going down the line, we have Adam Greenberg from Warby Parker. We have Sarah Feingold, who you just met, from Vroom. Charlie Kwalwasser from Bark and Company, and finally Shin from Yext. So Adam, if you want to start.
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Adam Greenberg. I'm the lead counsel at Warby Parker. We are an eyewear retailer, both online and offline. Started as really a pure play e-commerce retailer, one of the first in the country to really figure out how to sell prescription glasses on the internet, and have since expanded a brick and mortar presence to over 50 stores. I'm responsible for all legal, policy, government affairs efforts at the company. Only recently did we start really getting involved in government relations and public policy work, and most of it's related to our recently introduced telemedicine product that allows certain people to download an app on their iPhone and take an eye test using only their phone and their computer, and on the back end, a doctor is reviewing all your data and issuing a new prescription if it's warranted. Telemedicine is legally kind of like the Wild West right now, and people are trying to figure out what to do with it, and there are many entrenched interests who want to put up barriers or restrict it completely. So a lot of our conversation on the government level, both federal and state, has been around, how does this product work? What does it mean under existing law? How should law possibly be changed to expand access to telemedicine, and fending off efforts to restrict access to telemedicine?
Oh, that works a lot better. Hi, I'm Sarah Feingold. You might remember me from such talks as the Cannonball Talk 5 minutes ago. I'm general counsel of Vroom, and Vroom is an online, mostly online, but we also have physical stores, car dealer. We buy and sell cars. So if you want to sell a car, you fill out some paperwork, or you fill out like this screen, and we will make you an offer. We will wire you the money. We will pick up your car. And then we take the cars, the cars that we think are worthy of being on our website, we clean them up. And if you want to buy a car, you fill out paperwork again, pay us some money, and we'll drop the car off at your door. So that's our business model. In 2016, as I mentioned, we sold over $1 billion worth of cars. As for public policy issues, there are a lot of state-by-state regulations for used car dealers, and so we're just navigating those waters. There's also regulations for titling, registration. We have people in our offices that they drive because they're in Texas. They drive to the DMV and they wait in line and file some title paperwork with the DMV. It's kind of ridiculous. So we're only on the beginning steps of trying to figure out how to work with the government, with state governments, and try to make this a little bit more easy for the regular human beings who don't want to hang out at the DMV their entire life, which I think is most of us. But at Etsy, I was involved in net neutrality policy and some internet sales tax issues and that sort of thing. So I have a little bit of experience on both.
Hi everyone, my name is Charlie Kwalwasser. I am the general counsel at a company called Bark. We're a dog happiness company. The way we make money is sell dog products, primarily. General counsel, I'm the only lawyer there, so I do all the legal work and a lot of other things that get thrown my way. As far as public policy issues at Bark, it's not really something that is a major focus. We have more of, I would say, cause type focus around treatment of dogs and so forth. It's not so much a public policy thing as maybe like a social cause type of focus. Prior employers, not the previous one, but before that, when I worked in financial services, I spent a large amount of time on patent issues, both in Capitol Hill, and we also were active in the courts.
Hi, my name's Shin, and I'm with Yext. Yext is a software company, a SaaS company that is in an area that we've sort of dubbed digital knowledge management. We work with our software platform. Platform works with businesses of all sizes to help businesses keep their digital information up to date across all the different platforms that people consume data on. So whether it's Google Maps or Apple or Facebook, if you're a small restaurant that has weird holiday hours, or you might be Papa John's that has 200 different franchises, you could use our platform to sort of seamlessly keep all that information up to date and really manage all of your digital data. And so it's interesting. So I joined the company about a year ago, and we actually listed on the NYSE, had our IPO this April, and so it's been kind of a hectic year. I'd say most of the year has been focused on just getting public, and so we probably haven't spent a ton of time focusing on really specific policy issues. I think also gladly, the nature of our business and the nature of the data that we deal with is far less sensitive than probably a lot of tech companies deal with, because we're working with companies on data they want actually facing public. And so a lot of the privacy concerns aren't there. Prior to Yext, I probably spent about 15 years in the ad tech business, and kind of glad to be out. But ad tech, from the early days, I'd say I was involved in, really a lot of tech issues, many surrounding privacy, I think, but sort of the early stages of the internet advertising industry, where I think there was this, real tension between consumer privacy and, commercial needs. So, I think I've got some good stories from that world.
Awesome.
Once we get into, yeah.
Cool, thanks. Well, the first question that I have, I'll start with you, Sarah, because I know that that Etsy had been somewhat involved in well, certainly in net neutrality, but also in SOPA PIPA. So Legal Hackers was born, I think, as Phil mentioned at the beginning, in 2011, 2012, during the Stop Online Piracy Act battle that was happening in 2011, 2012 in Washington, D.C. It really awoke, it seemed, the consciousness of tech companies in New York and Washington, and then also in San Francisco. And something happened that was really interesting, which is that many of these tech companies utilized both their public presence on the web and also their user bases to stage public protests, in a sense, blackouts of their websites, various petitions, or interacting with their user base in order to have them contact Congress in other ways. And so what I'm wondering is, as a general counsel or in a legal department in a technology company that's facing policy issues, what considerations go behind engaging in such public protests or advocacy campaigns, or not to?
So I think it's really important to, before you engage in any sort of public protest to talk with your CEO and talk with your business folks and really have a big plan about this. When we were thinking about doing these sort of things at Etsy, we knew that we wanted to look at our community, we want to look at our business, we wanted to look to see if this even had an impact, this would have an impact on the cause. You don't want to, put your toe in the water on a ton of causes, because otherwise it might just be like, oh, this company is, of course, they're speaking out about a ton of different things. Like, this doesn't even make any sense. So we wanted to be really strategic about what we spoke out about. And when you're a company like Etsy, where you have user-generated content, where you have members that rely on you to make an income, you have to be really careful about what you do. So I think with SOPA and PIPA, Wikipedia, they went down for the entire day. And we had a conversation internally, like, should we go down for an entire day? And we're like, our members would be so mad at us. Like, that would really harm the community. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we did was respectful for the community and people who relied on this products and services for their income to pay bills, but at the same time voice that this was really important to us. So I think we had to come up with a solution in that sort of realm. But it takes a lot of conversations, and you want to make sure that everyone's on board, and that's something that you're willing to sign your name as a company and stand by for the long run.
Now, when, and by the way, if any of you have thoughts on any of these topics, feel free to jump in. You mentioned one example where it seemed to be the legal department going to the CEO and saying, hey, are you cool with this? How often does it happen the other way around, where the CEO is really passionate about an issue and goes to the legal department and says, I really want to dip my toe in the water on this, and then you need to walk them through why it is or isn't a good idea?
I guess it depends on the CEO, and it depends on what they're passionate about. Things come up all the time, and sometimes something will come up, and it's kind of like too late, something. But it all depends on the business. It depends on the CEO. It depends on your relationship with the CEO. But I think it's really important to try to look at what's coming down the pipeline and to make a plan so that you're not just trying to fumble together something last minute that just doesn't make any sort of impact.
Sure. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this?
But yeah, before we engage in a policy initiative, we ask ourselves a few questions. One is, what kind of an effort is this going to take? How much time and away from operating the business is this going to take? Two, if successful, what's the impact on our community? So on the business, on our employees, or on our customers? And three, what can Warby Parker's voice really do here? How could we be impactful, even if we engaged in all these efforts, spoke to all these people, wrote letters, posted stuff online, talked to legislators? Do we really think that we can have an impact on this issue? So those are the kind of questions we kick around. We're asked pretty regularly to sign our names to amicus briefs, to letters to the president, letters to the senators. Those are pretty easy tasks as long as you agree with the policy perspective. So if it's something that we agree with, we're often saying yes to those kinds of things, but major initiatives where you're leveraging the voice of your customers, those are much more difficult. You have to be very careful and sensitive to how you're engaging your customers. Our customers don't make money off of our business, but we don't want to take advantage of the fact that we have their email address or the fact that they love our company. If it's something that we think will benefit them, we will engage them. And we've really only done this rarely. The one time about a year ago, so we've been advocating for a couple years at the FTC to pass consumer-friendly regulations, amendments to what's called the eyeglass rule. Eyeglass rule is a federal regulation at the FTC that says if you're an optometrist and you give someone an eye exam and they pay for that eye exam, you need to automatically deliver their prescription to them. You can't condition handing over the prescription on purchasing a pair of glasses from your glasses store. And we're trying to make just common sense amendments, especially amendments that will help people buy eyewear products on the internet. So what we did was we engaged some of our customers and said, if this is an area that's important to you or you're passionate about, feel free to reach out to the FTC. Here's where you could file a public comment. Here's a template that could help you out with some language that might be that might be helpful for you. But other than that, we've really been reluctant to ask our customers to help us out in those kind of initiatives.
I'd say, you know, it really depends on the type of issue you're talking about. I think, as was discussed here, if it's sort of more a social-oriented issue, then I think it's often easy. You know, we signed on to as amicus for the travel ban, for example, that came out, and that was one where there was an easy consensus among the executive team, really no discussion, and a very strong conviction that this is the right thing to do, both from a social public policy perspective, as well as, you know, what's good for the business, what's good for the company, given how many foreign workers we employ. And so that's, you know, pretty straightforward. I think sometimes, you know, you get into a issue that has a significant impact on how you do your business, and could be very core to how you do your business. And I think that really depends on, again, what the type of issue is, but also how much in front of the issue you want to be and how visible you want to be. I think, you know, for example, in ad tech going back a few years, you know, I think there was always a lot of attention, again, on data privacy and user privacy. And, you know, my previous company was Millennial Media, which was one of the early mobile ad tech companies. And we also knew on any given issue that Google and Apple will probably be out there sort of fighting the fight too. So, you know, I think you can sort of draft behind some of their efforts and know that they're going to probably address the issues in a way that's going to be favorable to you. And, you know, frankly, I don't know that you want to be, if you're not quite as out there and well known as them, I don't know that you want to sort of raise your hand and be in a room with an FTC, you know, official telling them about, you know, sort of your profiling plans that you have and what you might do or what you can do. And so I think at times like that, it's sort of, you know, strategically best to sort of sit back and see how an issue plays out.
Sure.
I agree with everything that was said. Just the only thing I would add is sometimes it's important to be aware of what might be expected from your company by the public, instead of thinking completely about kind of your view internally. One example that comes to mind is I think it was maybe like almost a year ago, there was a taxi driver strike at the airport. I think it was because of immigration ban. And Uber continued to go there to pick up passengers, and it became like a big controversy. So, you know, sometimes you need to be really thoughtful, even if you're not even participating in something.
Sure. And actually, Charlie, I'd like to stay with you. You know, you mentioned your work in financial services before. And many of your startups are international in nature, if not entirely global. The internet itself is global. So my question is about policy management. And we talk about, you know, one particular law, right, or two laws, SOPA PIPA, for example, or the eyeglass rule or something like that. Very targeted. You go down, take care of it. But the financial service industry is heavily regulated. It's global. You have to deal with different jurisdictions. As a general counsel, how do you manage all of the various battles that you have at one given time?
So you're just asking generally, not just
yeah.
domestic. I mean, you have to prioritize. I think you have to be very in tune with management in your company and what's important to them. Someone has been using kind of like a recurring phrase with me recently that I think is like a really helpful thing to think about. It's about not making molehills into mountains, but making mountains into molehills. So you really need to focus on what is something that could be of significance, and then those things that are not, to make them just something that aren't going to be a problem. Time management just kind of takes over. And use resources that you have, especially if they're low cost. No real kind of special formulas.
Got it. Adam, I have a question for you, which is, you know, we talked about I think it's well known in the public, the way that Uber approached regulation, or at least local regulation, which is go in, build a user base, make them really happy, and then approach the regulator and say, listen, I got this user base. They don't like the taxi cab industry. They don't like what they're paying. now you should change. They felt like they had leverage at that point. Obviously, you need to deal with issues at the state level and then also at the federal level. Do you think that that approach has evolved over time? And what do you think the best way is, or what's Warby Parker's perspective on how best to engage on those issues?
Yeah, we're pretty new to government affairs, and we're still trying to figure out what our philosophy is. But when Warby Parker entered the optical industry about 7.5 years ago, we certainly had a different business model than most eyewear sales, but we weren't facing any regulations or existing statutes that posed existential threats to us or would have threatened to shut down the business. We operated within the regulatory framework. Granted, there are these regulations that, and it might not be apparent on its face, but the act of selling a pair of prescription glasses is a highly regulated activity. About half the states license the activity, and there are a lot of regulations about what someone who holds a license can or cannot do with respect to giving you a pair of prescription lenses. So we've operated within that framework. There are ambiguities. The laws clearly don't, because they were written in the 50s and 60s, don't speak to selling glasses online. It's not always clear where we should land on a particular issue, and we assess that one by one. But when it comes to telemedicine, which is really now how we're engaging with existing regulators and talking to legislators, we've taken the approach that we want to educate folks as early on as possible. We know that there is a lot of misinformation being told to these people, so we realize that we're going to commit resources and time to flying to St. Paul, Minnesota, and spending a couple of days meeting with senators and Congress members in this state to educate them on what ocular telemedicine is, what our product is, how it works, how it is legal under existing statute, and why the state should not be considering more restrictive legislation. And we found that once we get in the room with the people that are making policy, our argument prevails. It's just getting in that room. So, kind of a necessary evil is hiring a local lobbyist, and a lot of my time over the course of the past 6 months has been quarterbacking and managing a network of state lobbyists who arrange the meetings, have the relationships with the policymakers, and then traveling across the country and taking meetings and introducing people to Warby Parker and to the technology if they're not aware. So we found that approach to be working for us. We don't necessarily agree with the approach to just operate and launch and then ask for forgiveness later. We wanted to make sure we were introducing a product to our customers that in a few months down the road, we wouldn't have to take away from them. We want to make sure we're operating in an environment where we can continue operating, continue improving upon the product, and offering that experience to our customers.
Got it. How about the rest of you? Forgiveness or permission?
I certainly wouldn't advocate Uber's approach to just about anything. But I think that sometimes sort of a forgiveness approach is probably not a bad way to go when you're dealing with an area that probably there's not a lot of guidance. I think somebody mentioned that you're often dealing with sort of old laws that don't necessarily apply to new practices, and certainly when we were sort of in the early stages of mobile advertising, and I think people were just starting to get used to the idea that iPhones or Android devices could actually track where you're going with GPS devices, and I think in the early stages there wasn't a whole lot out there that really provided much guidance on what was right and wrong. So I think you really have no choice but to sort of go out, do what you're doing, and hope that you're not crossing many lines. I think one thing that really helps in that regard eventually is sort of consumer and regulator education. I think that and sometimes if it's a new industry, it's just a question of time before people can actually get a handle on what's going on. It's funny because people were all freaked out. When I first joined Millennial, it was right on the heels of a Wall Street Journal article that was, really creepy, and your apps are following you, and this was like the first generation or second generation of iPhones. And then you look at, Facebook and all the other social media, and people are checking in and telling the entire world, not just, where you are, but so many details about your personal life that you wonder, like, how is, there's such a disconnect. And so sometimes it takes regulation a while to sort of catch up to some of the technology and, certainly the consumer practices. And so I think there are times where you would just really have to go out there and kind of, go out on a limb or sort of take a leap of faith that what you're doing is okay, but it's going to, eventually be seen as okay.
Sure. Charlie, do you have anything to add?
I think depends on the circumstances. I mean, if you have no business, if you don't take the risk, then you take the risk.
Sure. You've mentioned, Charlie mentioned before, Ho mentioned before as well. Certainly there are core policy issues, things like intellectual property or net neutrality, things like that, that come up, tax. But there are also many social issues where tech companies have been getting more and more involved, which has both an external component, stating your values externally, but also an internal component, which is how you treat your own people. In the immigration debate, for example, a lot of it was about their own employees who were coming, or university graduate students who were coming to study STEM courses, things like that. So what I'm interested to know is, from your role as a general counsel, what's your role, first of all, in the external messaging, getting that message out there with any potential legal risks or strategy risks, but then also working with the people team internally? What role does a general counsel play to make sure you're, first of all, compliant with the law, but at the same time espousing your values, demonstrating them? So you can start with Ho, maybe, and work our way down.
Sure. I'd say, taking my job right now, I'd say I'm, legal is very much involved in both those things. I think, anything that's sort of external facing now, just as a byproduct of being a public company, I think everything has to be sort of reviewed by legal. And so we work hand in hand with, the marketing team, the comms team, and essentially review everything. Internally as well, we work very closely with HR. Obviously, there's a compliance aspect to it, but kind of feel like, just the way our company is operated, I think we're all we view each departments as, we're colleagues working together. So I think, no one would really think to do something without sort of collaborating on it. So I think, internal messaging probably falls under that. And I think, it's funny because I feel like we happen to work at a company that, at least the leadership and probably the broader group of employees are somewhat like-minded, and there are probably some issues, like you talked about, social issues that, are sometimes present some, interesting challenges. And I think as the GC, sometimes, I think first you have to look at it whether there are any legal implications, but then I think we also look at issues, in terms of what's the right thing to do. I think recently we had a situation, for example, LGBTQ is an issue that's probably evolved over the years as well. I think we as a company have determined that the right thing to do is to be inclusive and to not be, shy about being inclusive. And, we've done things like, a couple weeks ago we did, maybe longer than that, during Pride Week, we, showed our support for it. I think Google Business was launching a new feature that allowed businesses to say whether they're LGBTQ friendly or not. And we, made that, for our customers, we made that functionality available as well. And, we had a client or a potential client, I think, who may have seen some of the publicity around that. And, they said they weren't going to work with us. And, that was, an interesting situation, and, the company pretty much said their religious beliefs prevented them from working with us, from working with a company that was, so openly supportive of LGBTQ. So, in that situation, again, it was relatively easy. There wasn't much to deal with from a legal perspective. I think as a company, there was no sort of disagreement whether we were taking the right position or not. Everybody felt like, okay, we're going to lose some customers, but we felt this is the right thing to do.
Sure.
And that I think that has also evolved. When I was in ad tech, 10 years ago, that there you saw situations come up as well where you have a publisher network with some publishers that are targeted to gay audiences, and sometimes you'd get an advertiser who would find out that they were run on these sites, and you'd have some real issues to deal with, some of it contractual, and I think you'd have to deal with the legal issues first, and then think about, as a company, sort of what sort of policy do you want to stand behind.
Sure, absolutely. Anyone else? I'm really interested in the people side of the internal side of things, and actually, Sarah, you at Etsy, you would have to deal with not only your own internal people, but also your customer base. Was there ever a situation where you felt a tension between the things you wanted to accomplish socially, culturally, and then what your user base wanted?
Well, I think when you have a large user base, a lot of people have different opinions on all sorts of matters. And so I think whenever we at Etsy would go out and be really strong for or against a certain cause, we would take into consideration what our members might say. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that we didn't let the vocal minority dictate what we did, because I think if you are just waiting for every single person to give you the big thumbs up, like you're doing a great job, then you're never going to get that. So you really have to just take appropriate risks and just be prepared to either lose some business, which can happen and will happen, and then just be prepared with responses. So either responses to your customers, responses to in press, and just make sure that you talk these things through and really set expectations for your leadership that, hey, listen, we think that this is important, you think this is important, however, we're going to get some pushback, and we're going to anticipate the pushback, and we're going to be prepared.
So there's one of the things that's happened recently, I think, for our international audience members out here, this may be interesting to you, but of recent vintage, there are several corporate structures, but also certifications that companies can obtain or can register as, that allow them to not necessarily put the profit motive to the side, but put forward their own particular values and let their values lead rather than the profit motive if there's ever a tension between those. And those are the BCorp on the one hand, which is a certification that you can obtain, and then also the Public Benefit Corporation, which is available in a number of states that allows you to register as a company that essentially puts its values first in some situations. Two of the companies, I think at least two of the companies on the panel have certified themselves as B Corps. So I'm interested to know from X company, I suppose, Etsy, and sorry about that. So I'm interested to know what led that decision, and what was your role in that process. Maybe I'll start with Adam.
Sure. So yeah, Warby Parker is a certified B Corp. Have a very close affiliation with the nonprofit B Lab that administers the certification. Warby was a B Corp way before I ever joined the company, so I wasn't involved in that decision-making process. But essentially, what we say, what the B Corp status means, is that you consider more stakeholders than just shareholder value. Not in your corporate documentation, not in kind of your legal structure, but as a company philosophy, your mission is to think about helping other communities, other stakeholders as well, around the environment, around supply chain ethics, workers' rights. So that is core to the company's value system. The kind of what Warby Parker is most known for on the social responsibility, social innovation front is our buy a pair, give a pair program. For every pair of glasses we sell, we distribute a pair to someone in need somewhere around the world. And in terms of policy making and government affairs, there hasn't been much overlap between our buy a pair, give a pair program and our kind of government affairs efforts until recently when we partnered with the City of New York, with Mayor de Blasio to commit to providing free glasses to any community school child in New York City who needs one. We found that there are a lot of school children, public school children in New York who need glasses and don't know that they need glasses. And it really transforms their lives and their performance in school and their happiness in school once they realize that and they get their first pair of glasses on their face. So last school year, I believe we distributed 15 or 20,000 pairs of glasses to community school students, and next year we will plan on distributing even more. Talking about that, especially with New York policymakers, has been really helpful, and it brings, generates interest for people to get to the table and talk to us about that and other policy issues. But yeah, that philosophy, that buy a pair, give a pair program, has been core to the company since its founding over 7 years ago.
That's amazing. Way to go. I just felt very emotional thinking about like a kid and who couldn't see the board and now has a really cool pair of Warby Parker glasses like down the street. Like sometimes you hear about these, buy one, someone else gets one, and it's far removed from you. But as a New Yorker, that's amazing. Thanks for doing that. I didn't know that it was so close to home. I don't remember the question.
BCorps.
I was too busy listening to Adam. Something about BCorp certified. Etsy is again, I haven't worked there for over a year, we were certified and maybe are right now with B Labs, and it was a decision because it felt really core to Etsy's values, and to be certified, it was a big pain in the butt. So we had to do like happiness surveys. We had to look at our metrics for different employee types. We weighed our trash. Like every day we would weigh our trash and see what was getting composted. And we looked at our water usage and our electric. Like it was no joke.
Don't you have to measure the number of miles employees travel?
Yeah. We had to do that. It was just, and then you're just waiting for your score to come in, and you had to get a certain score, or else you wouldn't meet expectations, and we did. And then the next year we did it even better, and we were really proud of ourselves. But it's a big pain in the butt to take on that, but we thought at the time, and I don't work there anymore, that it was worth it. And we thought that it was really valuable to our employees, for our culture, for what we stood for as a company.
Awesome. So before we go into questions, I just want to wrap up with another core thing for legal hackers, which is the practice of law itself and innovation in the practice of law itself. So maybe I'll start with you, Charlie. What I'm interested to know is you've been in everywhere from a large company, a large, heavily regulated company, to a mid-sized startup, to a brand new startup where you're serving as general counsel. How have you seen the practice of law change? And how are you integrating technology or leveraging tools from, say, the tech community in order to be more efficient, to get more done when you have fewer resources, say, in a startup?
Okay. So I've only been a lawyer for 16 years. So the entirety of my career, I've had the internet. I have no lawyers that started without the internet, so they have really good examples. So Google has changed my life as a lawyer, especially in-house. It's amazing what you can do with Google. When I used to be at a law firm, I remember I worked on a case and we were doing document review, and I was actually reviewing hand-drafted red line copies of merger agreements. So one thing that's definitely changed my life is I don't need to use outside counsel to draft documents. I could do it myself because I have the ability to red line documents myself. Again, these are things I've always had, but I imagine if I didn't, it would have been a big pain in the butt. How else has it changed my life? I think there's a lot more collaborative tools that you can do that are cloud-based now. So that's super, super helpful and efficient when working with outside counsel or not needing to work with them at all. DocuSign is fantastic. I love DocuSign. Don't have to sign things by hand and scan them in constantly. What else? I'm sure there's more.
Do you find that you're relying, well, you mentioned contract drafting, relying less on outside counsel. Do you find that across the board you're using outside counsel for more targeted purposes or more limited circumstances?
So, I mean, everyone has a different philosophy on this. I tend to be a cheap person, so I don't use outside counsel much generally. But I would say when I use them, it's primarily for something that I feel like I just cannot do by myself, either because I don't know it or I don't have time to do it. Otherwise, I try to do it myself, unless someone wants to use outside counsel. The biggest examples would be if we're in litigation, I'm always using outside counsel, like patent and trademark applications. We don't have internal people doing those. That's probably the biggest. I mean, if we do like a financing, whether it be equity or debt, we're going to use outside counsel. But pretty light usage if required.
Gotcha. Anyone else, how technology has changed your practice?
So I'm probably the oldest one up here. So I started practicing about 25 years ago, pre-email. So early on in my career, I was a litigator. So sadly, I spent many hours in conference rooms full of literally piles and piles of documents. So that has changed significantly. I think the one biggest aspect of it is it's really made the world smaller, and so I do deals now, or we can do a merger where I'm sitting in Washington D.C., my lawyer's in L.A., and we're looking at where the target company is in Boston, and or take that even further, and you might be looking at an international company. And so I think the means of communication, the ease with which you can send documents back and forth, and negotiate the documents is much easier. Doing even some of the more mundane stuff like board consents and board books and things like that become much easier with technology and DocuSign and things like that. So it's all I think for the most part it's all very good. I think it also I've noticed an uptick in typos and mistakes coming from outside counsel that you're paying $1,000 an hour for. And so that gets a little bit annoying because I think that is too much of a reliance on spell check and document, word processing tools. But it's changed significantly since when I started out.
Gotcha. Sarah, how about at Vroom?
+1 for Google, +1 for DocuSign. So I started my career at Etsy in 2007, and when I moved to New York, I was just looking for people who were at similar small startups and were in their legal team, and there weren't that many. And now I just feel like everyone I meet is a general counsel of a startup, which is so awesome. And I think that the internet is because of all of this. So it's making the practice of law a little bit better for me because I have other friends that I can call up and say, hey, you're in a very similar situation. Can we talk about something? I'm also on some really amazing mailing lists where we trade information or suggestions or even documents like, I'm writing this policy. Does anyone have any suggestions? And people are really generous. So I think with the internet and more lawyers in companies, it's been great for me.
Awesome. Adam?
Yeah, I might be maybe practicing law the fewest amount of years here. I don't know, but all those tools are great. But I still think there is work to be done. A lot of what we do is still manual and tedious. For example, I still need to read every word of the contract. I mean, unless you make a concerted decision not to read certain contracts, but there are tools out there that use advanced technologies to scan a document and maybe let you know what terms there are in there that are unfavorable or unacceptable to your position. But we haven't come across anything that is worth really exploring or is affordable. So it's still a lot. There are more tools and more collaboration tools that lawyers could adopt, especially at law firms. And at law firms, I'm still getting long memos and still downloading Word documents and then reattaching them and downloading PDFs and getting faxes like Sarah mentioned. If we could figure out a way to get law firms to join in using collaborative tools like Google Docs, for example, is a big one. I don't think at Warby, I manage several law firms, maybe a network of 15 to 20 law firms. We've taken the approach that we want to use experts in the subject matter where we need help, even if it means signing on many law firms as opposed to one law firm who could do everything moderately well. Which it gives me kind of an extra administrative headache, but I think is best for the business when you get the best advice. But I don't know of any law firm that we work with that uses Google Docs, which is really helpful when you have to be the middle person between the law firm and the business folks and reinterpret those conversations for the other side. If we could all kind of get in the same room and talk about stuff. It would be really helpful for the in-house counsels in the room.
We were recently doing a round of funding, and I was using Google Docs for some of our disclosure schedules, and I think outside counsel was like, "What is going on here?" And they had to get Gmail accounts so that they could open them up. But it made it so much easier for me to collaborate with all the stakeholders in the company, and then eventually it went back to Word. But it was great for me for the time being. But they sent it to me in Word, and I just took it, cut, paste, Google Docs to get things done.
Going to admit that I do the opposite.
What?
Whenever someone sends me as a Google Doc, I turn it into Word.
So I'll do one better. We still spend.
Turn it into a fax.
No, we
You
spent,
handwrite it.
We spent many all-nighters at the financial printer doing, pen markups of printer-proof documents, and I think there are programs like Workiva who are doing great jobs with S1s, but I think people of my generation will refuse to ever use those because it's not how we've done things, and so that's one thing that I have to confess that I'm probably in the dark ages about.
Law firms will still refuse to use Workiva or similar for that part. Yeah.
Sure. Great. Well, first I want to thank the panel, and then we'll go into questions. So thank you very much. We have a few minutes for questions, so if anyone wants to ask a question, we
have to use the mic.
level here.
Here it is.
Yeah. You have to stand. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you guys. That was a great panel and very interesting. Just picking up on the last point about the collaborative work tools and things in Google Docs. One of the things I'm always super curious about, and I'd love to hear your view, particularly like Alan, you were saying the way you've kind of parceled out your legal work by expertise. So I used to be an M&A practitioner, right? So I used to do that internally to all the specialist groups. And it would always come back through you, and you were running the document, right? And there's definitely a lot of inefficiencies there from a process perspective. But the one thing it always did is it helped. There was a quarterback who was getting all that specialist information, who had visibility across a complicated deal and would know, oh, this environmental lawyer just said this thing which is relevant over here that they would have no idea about, but I now know this. And so I'm always really curious how people who take this approach, and you certainly gain inefficiencies from it, have you encountered kind of problems where you really there are some benefits to those inefficiencies of having these process inefficiencies, funneling things through like very narrow bottlenecks. Have you encountered any of those? And if so, like, what do is it worth it from a trade-offs perspective? I'm just very curious.
Yeah, I mean, there are difficulties being the quarterback, being the point person. What I've tried not to do, we work with a workforce at Warby Parker that really don't have careers that have put them in front of very many lawyers. So long contracts, legalese could be intimidating to them, and I don't want to put them in the position of having to deal with that stuff. So what I've tried to do is not take the approach where I just forward on advice from counsel. And what we're working on most of the time are not big deals. So it's not really one merger agreement that's getting marked up a million times. It's asking, we're thinking about this kind of advertising, or we're thinking about doing this sort of activity in our store. Is that okay? Like, is that a good idea or a bad idea, right? And a lot of time it'll generate a lot of back and forth conversation with the specialist outside counsel we're dealing with. And I don't want to have to put my colleagues in a position of interpreting some arcane law or a long memo that a law firm writes me. So what I try to either do, and it adds more time to my work, but also ultimately ends up being the most efficient approach, is either getting everyone on the phone and being on the phone with them. So instead of trading off really long emails, it's probably also more efficient from a cost perspective for us to just get everyone on a 15-minute call rather than exchanging emails over the course of 3 days. But also take it when a call's not possible and I want it to be on paper or on email, take what the attorney says to me, try to distill it in kind of business, plain English terms, an actionable recommendation for the business person, which leaves us running around in circles, talking to a bunch of people and trying to distill information from both sides, inputs from both sides, into something that'll make sense for the lawyer on one side and something that'll make sense for the business person on the other side. It adds a lot of juggling conversations for us, but I think it's most efficient ultimately not to just throw your colleagues in the deep end and say, here, go figure it out with this lawyer who might not be speaking the same language as you, figuratively.
I actually have a question. So staying on the topic of technological solutions, improving the practice of law, and one of the things you had mentioned was something like OCR, or being able to read documents electronically and picking out terms. But what are the other areas where you see technology lacking that you wish would improve or could improve to help your practice as a general counsel? I'm looking for business ideas, basically.
I don't know. It's up to you to start your business, my friend.
He's on my team, so I wouldn't encourage that.
If you can figure this out, it'd be fantastic. So, bridging the gap between something that's truly easy to read in plain English and something that someone will read, and satisfying regulatory requirements, because they're completely, especially in financial services. I mean, I got something in the mail recently because I think one of my credit cards, they changed the terms of the agreement. Literally all they changed was, I think they instituted a late payment fee. I had like 10 pages in my envelope. It said the same thing 50 times. There was like all these documents saying what it was saying. And I'll give you another example that's completely ridiculous. I'm kind of venting now. I have a mortgage with Citi. I called them because I got like an escrow statement. I didn't really understand it. By the way, I have like a CFA and I've been a lawyer for 16 years and I don't understand the escrow statements that they sent me, but that's another issue. So they sent it to me, and the first thing they say on the call is, this is an attempt to collect a debt. I'm like, but I don't owe you any money. And they're like, yeah, we know, but we have to stay that. New York State requires us to say that. So these are just examples about if you can figure out a way to kind of bridge regulatory satisfaction with common sense, you'd be a millionaire, a billionaire, 100-billionaire, trillionaire.
Awesome. Terrence, and I think that's gonna have to be the last question, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're gonna right up here. Yeah, because otherwise you're gonna get
Sorry
feedback.
about that. So thank you very much for the talk. It's very insightful. And I'm very curious about the policy advocacy problem, that how you get the permissions or forgiveness sometime, maybe in some occasions. I understand the technology policy often involves a lot of online transactions and shared economy, and then the most real part from the government is about the enforcement, like particularly in the time of frauds. So how would you convince the government that to take a less restrictive approach, particularly that enforcement is not easy in this type of business?
That enforcement would be difficult?
Yeah, the enforcement will be very difficult. How will you convince them mitigate their concerns about over the enforcement issues?
Yeah, so our policy issues, I guess we've had kind of different conversations with regulators and policymakers, not so much from a standpoint where we try to convince them not to enforce something or that enforcement will be difficult. Mostly our conversations are, please don't pass this law. This law would be a really bad idea. And I'm pretty new to this, but different arguments play with different people depending on their where they land on the political spectrum. So a lot of it is, and a lot of my job lately has been more of PR than it has been of law. When you get into a room with a policymaker, telling the right story that will make that person interested and kind of. They have especially state legislators. They have so much going on. There are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of bills introduced each session, and everyone's knocking on their door, and you get like a 15-minute window to get in there and tell them, what you want to tell them, and it needs to be concise, and it needs to be something that it's going to be impactful for them. So it's really intellectually stimulating activity, trying to craft that message for each individual person based on what the local expert is telling me that person cares about. So very, heavy on a lot of time spent on messaging and understanding who you're talking to and what makes that person tick.
Great. Thank you all very much for joining. And on to the next panel, blockchain. Thank you very much.